Happening now. We want to welcome our viewers from across the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good morning, good day, good evening. This is EdTech Situation Room, episode number 317 on January 27th, 2024. My name is Jason. What?
17th.
What did I say?
I think you said 27th, but
Okay.
whatever.
It's some day in January in some year. And I am Jason Neiffer. I am the executive director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located on the beautiful University of Montana campus right here in Missoula, Montana. And joining me tonight, as always, good evening, Dr. Wesley Fryer. How is East Coast America tonight?
We have been missing most of the cold weather that has absolutely rocked a whole lot of the country. And I noticed that you have a blue tent tonight, and I'm not sure if that is because, 30 below or whatever. It's a little cold, but I'm the media literacy and STEM, one of the media literacy. Well, I am the media literacy teacher, but one of the STEM teachers at Providence Day School here in Charlotte. We were actually 19 this morning, which I think that might be the coldest we've had, since we've lived here, but it really hasn't gotten it hadn't gotten under freezing that much. We've gotten a ton of rain in the last week or so, and we're going to have, some colder weather here for a little bit, but we really, really have been dodging the bullet, especially relative to a lot of the country. So what has the big sky country, how has it been treating you? And I would suspect you may be hibernating at this point.
A little bit, yeah. It's been pretty cold here for the last, really 4 or 5 days. It did get to, I think it was negative 28 in Missoula over the weekend was our low. And I would complain about that, except I was talking to the superintendent of Saco Public Schools in northeastern Montana, and she said that it was negative 51 at their low. So I'm going to take negative 28 and call that a win. In comparison to the delightful weather of beautiful northeastern Montana. So, so we take the wins as they come. I was scheduled to go on a trip on Sunday to kind of north central east Montana, but it would have been a 7-hour drive back on Monday so that I could be at an event yesterday at the University of Montana. And I just decided that, at the risk of sounding like a wimpy urban Montanan, that was maybe a bridge too far for me. But the good news is it has been dumping snow in Missoula all day today. In fact, my wife is taking a flight out tomorrow morning, or maybe taking a flight out tomorrow morning heading to Texas. But that may or may not happen, but certainly we're going to get back up in the 40s apparently later this week and early next week. So we'll take our wins as they come.
Wow. Well, especially when we have exciting weather, we got to talk about it. But allegedly tonight is going to be about some technology news. And I see that you have done your duty and filled us with many exciting AI articles as well as other things. So what are we up to this evening?
Well, we'll take a look at some AI news for sure. We also have some big tech correction, social media, Apple news, some security news, and of course tonight we will end with our Geeks of the Week. But right now, Dr. Fryer, what can I interest you in to talk
about? Let's jump to social media. As I re-listened, actually watched on YouTube last week's episode. I don't know. Do you think other podcasters do that? I end up, listening to our shows again, and I pick up new things. I wish that I had talked about this article, so I'm going to go ahead and pick this up first. This is Tech Dirt, and it's from January 10th. And the title is, Substack realizes maybe it doesn't want to help literal Nazis make money after all, but only literal Nazis. So I put this under social media. This is a very important issue, which we've talked about before with content moderation and social media. And that is that platforms, especially when they get to scale, have to be moderating content. Like, you can't just say, hey, anything goes and, expect to comply with the laws, certainly of the United States and in many other countries as well. There has been a real pushback, and probably you too, Jason, because I think you're listening to the Hard Fork podcast fairly regularly. Heard Casey Newton talk in the last maybe 2 weeks about a letter, I think, or an email that he wrote, and then an interview that he did. He and others, who are very, very big Substack publishers, threatened to leave the platform. And some did. Some have left the platform because Substack, sort of like we heard, early Facebook, and we kind of hear now with, Twitter. I'm not going to call it its new name. saying, well, people have free speech to really say whatever they want. So this is a pretty good recap of what's been happening. Substack CEO Chris Best had said last April, according to the article, that they would not, moderate Nazis and people who are espousing, and trying to promote violence and genocide and things like that. And so I think, man, this is so important to talk about in the context of civics and school, right? Understanding free speech. Free speech is something that is limited. It is not unlimited. The First Amendment does not say you can say whatever you want, whenever you want, without any consequence. It just doesn't say that. And so the more I see articles like this, the more I would love to see, civics teachers, which maybe this is happening in every civics classroom in the country. I don't know. But my perception, having some conversations with my middle school students about this, is that there's not a real deep understanding of this. And it's a super relevant thing. So I have wondered whether I should leave Substack. We do have a Substack for the EdTech Situation Room. It's really pretty wonderful because rather than, pay a fee, if we reached a certain point or whatever, I think we would have to. But, it's a free mailing list, and it's a way to archive links, and it's a way to, get the show out there. And I've enjoyed and still do enjoy reading Substack. And so I really want this platform to succeed. But in order to succeed, I think they are going to need to do some moderation. So while this article wasn't like completely, hey, it's all wonderful, at least they are moving in the direction of some moderation and responding to Casey Newton and others.
Yeah, totally. And I had listened to the Hard Fork podcast last week. I'm only about 2/3 of the way through it. I was very appreciative that even though obviously that Platformer and Casey Newton were at the center of this story, they added extra stuff too, right? So they went in some depth about the discussion. I thought it was very enlightening and very interesting. And then they also had a full show on top of that. So that really is my must listen to podcast now. Every single week, because I feel like it does a really excellent job of highlighting what I really need to know, especially in kind of the quick evolving AI world. But yeah, I mean, they mentioned, how it's worked on other platforms. Sometimes it's about hosting them, but demonetizing them. And other times it's about, what or how to engage in content moderation. And I also took from the podcast that, that it's not entirely clear if this is a free speech argument or it's another kind of argument. I feel like that at one point it looked like both. But the bottom line is that we don't really have full free speech in the United States. We have freer speech than most Western democracies for sure. But the bottom line is that just because you have free speech rights doesn't mean that you have to, or you're guaranteed a platform to use them, especially when there are web hosts, for example, that will happily host, for lack of a better way of putting it, distasteful content. And be able to provide you a platform there. And it harkens back to the complexity of the free speech discussion. A couple of years back, I engaged in a very small and inconsequential campaign to get our local newspaper to turn off comments. And because it felt like no matter what, and I don't care which side of the political spectrum that you happen to be on or none of the above, that it just wasn't very productive, right? Like we would have, tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of articles that are great and informative, but the comments were always super vitriol and not very useful at all, in my humble opinion. So the part that I was really concerned about was that it felt like that it was taking away from the utility of the journalism. And so I did end up talking to an editor at the local paper, and I also posted something on Facebook about it. And what was super, super interesting about that to me was that a lot of people had free speech arguments that they wanted to make about it. And and it's like, well, that's not really free speech. Just because you have free speech doesn't mean you get to, spread your opinions everywhere. It just means that the government can't take your right away of speech. And in the same way that I don't have to let you speak on my blog, or, especially when in 2024, getting a platform is just really not all that difficult. So, yeah, very interesting conversations for sure. And then I would just also add that this is going to become increasingly interesting, maybe nuanced, because I think 2024 and also the rise of AI is going to create exponential amounts of content, whether it's one person that believes these things or 1,000. And I think that's also something we need to be very thoughtful about as well.
So I'd like to segue to one other, and then I'll defer to to your good wishes on articles. Normally, we're kind of breaking our AI and other things, but this is going to join them. I put this under the regulation title under our AI articles tonight. This is from Ars Technica on January 17th. And the headline is, OpenAI must defend ChatGPT fabrications after failing to defeat libel suit. And so when it comes to content moderation, there's some super interesting points that are made in here. I mean, one of them is, there's a lot. One of them is that, a ChatGPT response isn't a published response. If somebody takes the output of ChatGPT and publishes it, then they are the publisher, and then they would be the one responsible for it. This lawsuit is alleging that ChatGPT's hallucinations are, being allowed to ruin people's lives. And so what is this journalist? Is it Walters? Who is anyway? The judge in the case has so far. It's too early, they say, to find out whether OpenAI's arguments are persuasive. But I think that a lot of what they're saying is pretty persuasive. This gets into what we were talking about, I think, last week about is an AI, is a large language model going to be considered an entity that, for instance, has the right to read things and watch things and ingest things in the same way, that a person can do, and be able to learn from those things? Or is it somehow going to be restricted and have, be banned from being able to do that? So I think that, it is there. And then there's some other other elements about this, but it's just fascinating because this has to do with content moderation, but it also has to do with what an AI can do, and hallucinations, and who's going to be liable for it, and some of these things. I mean, if one of these court cases goes against AI, it seems like it could just be hugely detrimental, because it's like, oh my gosh, you can't exist because things that you're going to say are going to have too much of a chance of being liable and harming people. But it'll be this one will be one I hope we can follow up on, because the way in which it ties to content moderation, and libel and rights for a large language model, I think is fascinating.
Yeah, totally.
All right.
Okay, let's do a quick kind of bit of Apple news. So first and foremost, Apple's announced that the Apple Vision Pro, which is their headset, will be released on, I think it's February 2nd is the date itself. But I did find an interesting article from Bloomberg that talked about how the Vision Pro, it sounds like it's going to be quite an event to even get a Vision Pro. And a couple thoughts from the article itself. You have to apparently you have to go in for a 25-minute sales pitch, I think, and I can't figure out if it's mandatory. I read the article only once through, but it's interesting because it's apparently things like will have a machine in the store to measure your glasses, so that you can compensate for eyesight, right? Because you can't wear the thing with your glasses.
So in other words, you'll have a corrective lens when you put it on.
Yeah, it will correct it for you. That also tells me that's going to make things like that hard to share too, right? And in the same way that a lot of headgear you don't want to really share anyways, right? But that apparently they need to calibrate it to their face and to their eyes and their hands, and yeah, it's going to be a pretty involved piece. So I was not a candidate for a $34.99 headset. I could very well be a candidate in its second and third generation. But it's coming soon, and I'm sure that all the Uber nerds will jump in on this. I mean, $34.99 isn't terrible when you consider the history of devices, right? Because I believe, if you look at $34.99 compared to what a typical Mac might have cost in 2000, for example, it's probably not that far off of a price. But still, interesting stuff, and we'll have to see what it looks like. Apparently, and I can't remember if this is article or elsewhere, the apps are starting to show up in the App Store that are compatible with Vision Pro. So that's something to look forward to as well.
Okay, my VR share related to this. I'm not going to be a candidate for first gen either, but I'll drop this in. Back in, I want to say this was like 3 years ago. No, 2022. That wasn't that long ago. February of 2022. 2 years ago. My wife and I got to go to Houston to the Johnson Space Center for this wonderful space exploration educators conference. In Houston at that time, they had this thing called the Infinite Experience. And so you strapped on, I guess they weren't Quests. What kind of headset were they? You strapped on these VR headsets, and it was about the ISS. But this was basically, they rented like some kind of a warehouse and then had this whole, and it was dark, of course, darkened, and you went in, but it was an incredible immersive experience. It was the most intense VR experience I've had. We went to a mall, the Galleria Mall in Dallas, a few years before that. And I think this is when Facebook was just getting into MetaQuest, and they were in malls and they were having demos that you could do. And it was okay, but it was sort of like, oh, here's a dinosaur and there's a waterfall, or I don't know. But this thing with, the ISS, and you literally, I mean, you were there in the ISS, and then you could walk out and step out, and there's the Earth and low Earth orbit. It was really, really mind-blowing. So I'm going to say I'm really excited that Apple is finally getting into the VR world. It shouldn't come as a shock to anybody that their hardware is priced pretty expensively, because we've really never seen anything from Apple that we've been like, right, oh my gosh, look, it's going to be so cheap, it'll compete with Chromebooks or something. I think I saw another headline, I didn't put this in, about, apps finally coming out, from developers. So it's just going to be fascinating to see what kinds of things are created, but certainly a high quality device, I think, that's going to probably set the bar for the marketplace. Are we going to be in the Ready Player One world, very soon? I don't think so. We really are going to have to see these things priced in a much more consumer level, price range to have a sizable impact. But that's the way sometimes early technologies happen, right? How did Tesla, get started with their, first vehicles? They were really high-end cars, and, people bought them, and then they were able to produce things that were cheaper, et cetera, et cetera. So do you know anybody, Jason, that might buy one?
No, I mean, if the price point, actually, if the price point was $1,000, I'd be all in. To be honest, I feel like that's something that I might be willing to put into it. But I think $3,500 is there for a reason, and I think I honestly, I don't think they want it to become an early hit in that way, right? Because I think they know that it's going to be bumpy the first time around. I was a first generation iPad purchaser, and it was great, and it was pretty darn magical. But the second and third generation iPads were, a step ahead of iPad 1.
Same thing with iPhones, same thing with the MacBook Air. I mean, you could probably list just a ton of products that were like that, except the iPod, right? The original click wheel iPod. There was just something about that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I owned one for a little while. I bought one used and then sold it for twice what I paid for it, because that's the weird Apple stuff that works in the world. But yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure they're going to redefine this category, right? And I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure about that. But I also think it's a little complicated, because there is just a lot of there's a lot of other people in this space that have pretty decent products at a better price. And, I know a lot of nerds with VR headsets, but I just don't feel like it's all that mainstream yet. Now, could it reinvent work, for example, because it could create this immersive desktop? that you can, sit in your, in the coffee shop all day, sucking down coffee and with your huge 14 monitor set. Well, sure, it could do that. But I don't know if that's really the way this is going to go, at least not yet.
Yeah. Well, we will have our annual State Educational Technology Conference the first weekend, first Thursday and Friday of March. And so since this is coming out in February, it'll probably be too soon for them to be able to have, like demo units and stuff. But I don't know. It would be really cool. And we'll certainly be one of the people ready to sign up to have a demo whenever those become available in the store, wherever they will be.
What's your closest Apple store?
We've got one right downtown. So in fact, we were gonna go to a free class about Procreate on the iPad this weekend, and I actually missed it, but I've got to reschedule. But yeah, it's about 20 minutes away. So
yeah, well, I'm now very jealous. Okie dokie. And then one other quick article on the Apple world. The Supreme Court upheld the Apple versus Epic ruling. Apple must allow developers to link their other payment systems from 9to5 Mac on January 16th. I'm not surprised by this, but what I would also add is that there is an interesting kind of asterisk in this article that apparently Apple's required to allow third-party payments in other markets, like I want to say it was Denmark, and they still are collecting a 27% fee on everything that is referred to in the app. So I don't really know how they pull that off, but I don't think it's one thing to not allow third-party payments, but it's another one to say that the essentially the customer here can dictate what the fees look like.
Huh. Okay, I could have put this under Apple and I put it under tech correction. But mine is a Mac Rumors article, but it was before that one came out. So this was the rumors, and this was saying App Store to be split in two ahead of EU phone sideloading deadline. And so according to this, and again, this was prior to the release of the ruling that you just mentioned, the prediction was going to be that Apple was going to have to be having multiple app stores, and it's really, really interesting how regulation and regulation in Europe, relative to other places, is influencing things. And so maybe we can get more detail on that. But it was not only that that basically jailbreaking would be legal for everyone. In other words, you could put another app store like Cydia, which was the jailbroken one, on your device, but that you could also link out, so that if Epic or somebody else wanted to, process payments. I hadn't read that part though about they were still going to be able to take the percent, because I think that's the whole point of running your own payment processor, was that Epic wouldn't pay the 30% Apple tax and they would be able to gain more money. So.
Well, let me read a couple paragraphs from this. The 9to5 article is written by Benjamin Mayo, and there's two interesting things here. The Apple versus Epic decision will mean that apps will now be allowed to tell their users that other payment options are available with a direct link to the app's website. If customers opt to use the alternative payment methods, developers will be able to collect more revenues, as they won't necessarily have to pay Apple's cut of the commissions. However, it isn't that straightforward, as Apple may require developers to share commissions anyway. In the Netherlands, for instance, dating apps are allowed to use alternative payment methods, but Apple still requires developers pay a commission equivalent to a 27% cut of revenue. So, and the bottom line is that, I think that Apple can make a security use case for their app store, right? And one thing I do know from my experimentations in Android, there are dozens of app store alternatives, not the least of which is Amazon's app store, which you can download, although it's basically a ghost yard of doom now. And because the apps aren't updated at all, and more importantly, the apps that are on there are terrible, and so it's not really all that useful. But there are, I usually will install on an Android device 3 app stores. I'll have the Play Store, I'll have the Amazon Store, and then I will also download something called F-Droid, which is an open source app store, and I trust that one because the open source community polices it pretty well. But there are hundreds of other app stores. And I remember when in the early kind of Yahoo days of Android, kids would tell me, the students would tell me this, that, they get all their free apps from this app store, which, what the interface wasn't even in English. And it's like, that's seems like a real risky proposition to download an app store that you don't even are unable to read the native language of the app store, and then start downloading commercial apps for free. So yeah, I think this is a really interesting development for sure, and I will be very curious to see how this plays out in Europe.
So here's some articles to segue there. Ars Technica today on January 17th. This is a Dan Gooden article. Headline: Researcher uncovers one of the biggest password breaches in recent history. Roughly 25 million of the passwords have not been seen before by a widely used service. And so this cites one of the security researchers we've talked about frequently on the show, Troy Hunt, who is a white hat hacker for Microsoft and is the creator of the infamous Have I Been Pwned website, which I need to share with my students and usually do each semester. Said basically did a sample. And so he sampled 1,000 of these passwords and then compared them to known passwords. And it even included one of his, which Dan Gooden, the author, says that probably meant there was some kind of password stealer that was installed. But like, oh my gosh, the complexity we already have with our current app store ecosystem. And then if you think about alternative app stores and, those security issues, it is just, we do have, and Dan mentions this in the article, the opportunity to transition to passkeys, which this is a May 23rd article about passkeys. Passkeys may not be from you, but they're safe and easy. Here's why. I have not transitioned to them, but anyway, we hear about security breaches. That's one of those kind of things. It's like, yeah, there's another security breach. Right. But like, have you changed your behavior? And we've said this before, it's been a while. Use the website, Have I Been Pwned? Show that to people, have them put have them put their email address or, like in the case of my kids, I have them put their parents' email address, which has been out there longer, and then see how many breaches and then exactly what has been compromised. And so, if you've reused your password, and that's something that's discussed in the article, that a lot of people, use very plain passwords that could be defeated by a simple, what they call it, dictionary hack or whatever, when you're not even using something that's randomized, but people repeat the use of their password. And so if you have used a password on multiple sites, and I don't know what the percentage is, but I bet it's a huge percentage of people that at least at some point in their life, maybe still have that password, that's the one that they use. And so anyway, we are very vulnerable. I'm glad that Passkeys has been developed. I need to take a serious look at it. I was prompted again by Google today when I logged into something to say, are you ready for Passkeys? And I'm like, no, I think I need to, but I want to read about it and understand it a little bit more before I jump into it. So have you taken a passkey plunge?
No, in part because I don't fully understand them yet.
Me too.
I really need to learn more about them, but I just went to Have I Been Pwned? As it turns out, I am part of this data breach. So
as it said, Troy Hunt, who is the Microsoft researcher, had one of his passwords in there. So like, there's a lot of passwords that are in this thing.
Yeah, and it's telling me here that in September 2023, over 100 gigabytes of Stealer logs and credential stuffing lists titled nas.api was posted to a popular hacking forum. And email addresses and passwords. In total, 171 million unique email addresses, 100 million unique passwords. So yeah, there that is. Woo!
And this is a drum that I absolutely believe we need to continue to beat on, because I think it's something people have heard a lot about and they know about breaches. But when we get down to it, what is your now regular, normalized, habitual behavior when it comes to passwords? And if it's not a password manager paired with two-factor authentication, paired with whether it's Watchtower on 1Password or whatever your tool is, Bitwarden, I think, is the one that many people, including Miguel Gulen and others, recommend, which is, I think, maybe an open source one. But these things are worth paying for, in my opinion, and our habits need to change. And so articles like this about the breaches, but then also talking about more app stores, more ways for, more vectors for bad actors to try and steal our credentials, all those sorts of things. I mean, I don't know about you if you see this on Facebook, Jason, but I'm sort of regularly depressed by how many people that I know post on Facebook this, bold statement: I'm going to deny Facebook the ability to use my photos by posting now. It works and all this. And these are these messages that have been debunked for years. No, you use Facebook, your photos are going to be saved. You can't just post something to your wall and then change the terms of service for Facebook. But, very savvy and smart people post that. And so I think if you're falling for this, thinking that you're changing the terms of service with something you're putting on your Facebook wall, I'm not super optimistic that you might have changed your security habits to keep yourself, safe from bad actors.
Yeah, and the bottom line is that, I mean, I think this is I'm certain almost a multi-gazillion-dollar business, of theft every year. But I don't think you should wait around for it to happen to you, and it will happen to you if you're not careful.
Yeah, definitely.
Oofed up.
All right. Well, we've gone just off the top of the half hour. We've touched on some AI, but we haven't leaped into it. Let me do this Teen Utah social media one real quick before we go to this. That's under tech correction. So this is again today, Ars Technica. Can you tell I like Ars Technica? Shout out to my cousin Devin Henley, who went with me to Macworld in 2007. I'd not really ever heard of it. It's was his favorite news site, and so I like to use it a lot too. Headline is: Teen sued Utah over social media law requiring curfew for minors. Platform found harming Utah kids will face crushing fines starting March the 1st. Well, this is a really, really smart lawsuit. And the high school student who's featured is named Hannah Zulek. She has joined the lawsuit. The lawsuit is being filed by an interesting group I had not heard of before. Let me see if I can find the name of them. And so basically they're saying several things, but the main part of it is that the law, quote, fails to define what constitutes physical, mental, emotional, developmental, or material harms, or what degree of harm gives rise to liability. And so the fear that Hannah and those who have filed this lawsuit have is that it's so vague that, it's going to have a really big chilling effect on social media platforms and their availability to minors who are under 18. So, folks who can, get married and drive cars and do all kinds of things, will be prohibited by law from logging into Facebook. The group is called the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, FIRE. And they said, it's just, well, they cite the U.S. Surgeon General, who said in a 2023 advisory that, quote, due to major gaps in research, it's, quote, impossible to generalize the effects of minor social media use as either extremely positive or negative. In other words, it's saying it's both, right? There's bad stuff, but there's also really good stuff. And so I think this is a very interesting lawsuit. And again, to me, this sounds persuasive. They describe it as well-intentioned but misguided. And I think that's a pretty, I think accurate description of what this law is. So it'll be interesting to see if this actually ends up in an injunction being filed, or if all, Utah students under 18 are going to be subject to all these restrictions and parental oversights.
Fascinating.
Yep.
Okay, well, let's do some AI stuff. I want to start off by saying that I had a wonderful opportunity yesterday to speak in front of pretty large group of folks at the University of Montana. School is not back in session for another week or so, but the folks that run our institution decided to have an AI innovation summit yesterday, and so I was one of the speakers in the morning. Delightful to connect with a lot of friends and colleagues from across the state, but as part of that, announced yesterday that we are now corporate purchasers of Copilot from Microsoft. And so we now have access to the corporate enterprise edition of Copilot. And I was surprised that wasn't something I was expecting. But now when I'm logged into my email account, I get access to Copilot directly. And I will say it feels just like regular old Copilot, right? But the one massive difference here that I noticed seconds after kind of logging in was that it has a statement and also a little kind of button, I guess, for a better way of putting it, that says that, hold on, I'm trying to get in here.
You don't have to face Clippy when you do Copilot, do you? And for those of you that don't remember, that was the Office 97 assistant that was much sort of hated, I guess.
Oh, Clippy. No Clippy, so that's for sure. But and I think it also supposed to appear in the apps, but I haven't had time to play with those quite yet. But there's a little green icon in the upper right-hand corner that says protected. And then on the lower left-hand side, above where it says ask me anything, it says your personal and company data are protected in this chat. So one of the big advertising features of Copilot is that it does not train on your data. In other words, it doesn't train on anything you're asking or anything you copy and paste into there. And so that's interesting to me, and certainly, maybe not a concern of mine, but it definitely is interesting that that's one of their pieces here. But the reason why I mention this is that I am now curious so how easy is it to get things snuck into the large language model? Because if regular ChatGPT or non-corporate Microsoft products or any of these, this is not about a particular company, this is about all these models, if they're training off your data, doesn't that mean that you could basically feed misinformation into the model that eventually would get spit out to someone else? And so almost certainly people with access to the APIs of these various models are starting to do things nefariously, hopefully just for testing, if not for actual disinformation. But since there does seem such a black box here, of information, I want to know the answer to that question, because obviously you want to avoid sharing your students or your colleague or anyone's personally identifiable information with the chatbot, just because we don't really understand how that process works yet. But if Microsoft's value add to Copilot is that it won't use your data, right? Like, it won't use your data to train the model, doesn't that mean that everyone else's data could train the model, whether you have nefarious purposes or not?
Elizabeth Springer is asking, will University of Montana staff just be able to use it, or will students, or do you know how extensive the availability is?
Hey, Betsy, I don't know.
No, oh, that's bad. It is. She's just going by Elizabeth today.
In fact, I've spent time with her this week, and we'll again on Friday. So I don't know the answer to that. I think it's just staff right now, but the announcement was pretty vague yesterday. And the bottom line is, and my thing about AI has always been that it doesn't really matter if your institution's providing it or blocking it or not, because it's sitting on so many apps now that you have a real access to it. And so no word on that yet. But and I played around with it a little bit in the last 24 hours. Well, first I scoffed a little bit. The other article that I'm referring to here is a TechCrunch article where Microsoft's now announcing a pro plan for Copilot. And at first I was like, well, I don't really know if I would pay that. The new consumer plan, Copilot Pro, is $20 a month. That seems expensive because I already pay for Office. But then I remembered I'm paying $20 a month to ChatGPT. And theoretically, you have access to those tool sets inside of the personal piece. So, it's really not that expensive. In fact, it's quite reasonable. So, yeah, I know. I'm really interested in this. Apparently it will eventually work across the entire suite: Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, OneNote, Mac and iPad. If you have a Microsoft 365 personal family plan, that is Copilot Pro, doesn't come bundled with a Microsoft 365 subscription. So certainly we're starting to get a sense of what this is going to cost folks. $20 a month. It doesn't seem that bad to get access to ChatGPT 4 and also image generation via DALL-E 3. But what I would also say, though, is that there are limitations. For example, Copilot, you can't upload documents for it to analyze, which is something I do very regularly with ChatGPT and Claude now. So yeah, interesting. And I think Microsoft is really making a lot of good plays here to continue to stay relevant.
Well, I've got an article related to that, but I'll say I just, of course, asked ChatGPT, are you able to train or get better on the data that I'm sharing with you? And it says, no, can't do that. And I said, what about when I create a custom GPT? And it says, as of my last update in April 2023, can't do that. That's not offered, but that may change. But, I can see that being an important feature that you could opt into, because the more that, this AI gets to know you, especially when it's a personal assistant. I mean, yes, there's a creepy side to that, but then there's also going to be a really powerful side. And I'll also say that, like, if you're primarily an Outlook email user, and then you think about being able to bring the power of AI and large language models to your email and being able to, do some real powerful filtering and, if not responding, at least drafting. I don't know if I said this on the show, but I had visited, or maybe we talked about it on the show, like with doctors. I mean, there's so much messaging that we all have to do. And I honestly think that it's something in schools that probably should be audited and really looked at, because we just kind of assume, oh, teachers, you're going to be fine with all this, extra stuff. But there are systems now that are being developed for medical professionals that can really assist them. And it won't answer the email, but in some cases it can draft the email. And so it can come up with something that then you can, very quickly send, and it'll be customized and things like that. But my segue article is tied big here. Did you hear about Microsoft topping Apple as most valuable company?
Did. Yeah.
Okay, so this is a pretty big one. I've got this as a New York Times gift link. So if you're not subscribed to the Times, you can go ahead and see the full article. But the headline is Microsoft tops Apple to become the most valuable company. And so this is a really, really big deal. And I think it shows the value of the investment which Microsoft made in OpenAI. And I mean, will they flip-flop? Will Apple move ahead again? They're both very high in terms of their market cap. There's a graph at the top of the article that is really crazy when you see how much valuation, since 2010, but even just since 2020, in the last 4 years or 3 years or whatever. I mean, it's stunning. That is some really, really high growth. And of course, it's moving up and down. But Apple has been the stock market's undisputed king in terms of market cap for more than a decade. And it overtook ExxonMobil in 2011 and has held the title without interruption. And the transfer of power has begun. So I would say that has everything to do with, well, there's multiple factors, of course. Microsoft's done a lot of smart things, I think, in terms of embracing multiple platforms and, embracing mobile and trying to really, the subscriptions, and they've done some good things. And I think, well, I know Jason knows it sort of hurts me to say these positive things, because I'm really not a super Microsoft fan, but I do think that Microsoft was very wise in making their investment in OpenAI and seeing that power and potential. And if I was going to use my crystal ball, I would say this this isn't going to change, because we don't really have any visible outward signs that I'm aware of that Apple is heavily investing in AI and that they're going to be a player in the AI world in the same way that Microsoft is and OpenAI. So
Yeah.
that's a big headline in terms of, like, for 10 years, Apple's been the market cap leader, and now it's Microsoft.
And then I will just mention this once. I don't have an article, but I'd heard this a couple of times on both news channels and podcasts last week. But Apple is moving their AI team from California to Austin, Texas, and that was misreported as Apple shutting down their AI division, and that's just not what's happening. So it's not a surprise to me that it gets misreported that way. But I really do think that Apple could very well end up dominating this space if they are very thoughtful about the way they implement their strategies here. So I still think that we will very soon see something interesting from Apple in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, it's just too big of a part of the world of change that we live in. So I dropped an article from the San Antonio Express News. 121 employees apparently have been relocated to Austin. That's the Siri team. So
yeah. And then we didn't get to it last week, but last week OpenAI launched the GPT store as a kind of next level of being able to share custom GPTs. And there's been a lot of interesting kind of developments here in regards to this. I have used about 4 or 5 dozen custom GPTs, nothing more than usually 5, maybe 6 minutes of playing around. But a lot of people are doing really, really, really interesting things. And one thing I know from my experimentations with GPTs, I made about a dozen or so. We've been working on ones at work for things like standards association and best practice chatbots and that sort of thing. But what we have discovered is that it really does make a big difference when you give it some parameters of how to respond to things. And, I think that we will always have, extremely interesting, large language models available to us in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it's not a ChatGPT directly, it's just licensed out to other providers like Microsoft or Google or Apple. But there will always be a role for the larger language models. I think over time, what we're likely to see is ones that are specialized for a purpose that are plugging into our tool sets. And so the thing that I have used quite a bit in the last a couple of weeks is, as a demonstration, is I've made my own email chatbot that is based on my tone in emails. I've collected about 40 pages of email text of what I consider my greatest hits over the years. I have a certain style of email. In fact, my team makes fun of me sometimes because of this. It's interesting how it plays out with my emails, because I think you can spot a JSON email a mile away, but it's able to write something that sounds pretty close. And I haven't, used it to straight up write an email yet or do the response for me. But if, ever in a pinch, or I just didn't know how to start an email, sometimes it's just hard to write a tough email. I think that's a part that I'm interested in kind of figuring out as well.
Absolutely. Well, and I'll talk about this with Geeks of the Week here in a little bit, but I think it would be really valuable to get together and just have people share their strategies for creating these custom GPTs. I really am thankful and happy that OpenAI allows users to go ahead and share their custom GPTs, but it's still a black box unless the creator, I think, decides to share with you, oh, this is what I'm using. This is how I built this. These are the documents that I have. These are the queries that I have. So it's pretty fascinating. I think those are things that are valuable to keep playing with in terms of, seeing their capabilities and what that can do for you.
Yep, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Okie dokie. Let's see. What else can we cover here before we call it a week? Oh, this one's really interesting. It's a rabbit hole for sure. But Rolling Stone reported on January 11th that a podcast group has created a brand new George Carlin comedy special. And this article talks a little bit about the comedy special. And George Carlin's daughter said that bad, ridiculous, don't, bad. And I listened to about 6 minutes of it, and it sounds like George Carlin. It has the style of George Carlin, but it talks about everything from hipsters to Elon Musk, and kind of utilizes his somewhat over exaggerated trademarks of his comedy. So and the comments are really interesting on this video. It's been watched about 422 million times, only 11,000 thumbs up. So, and they don't show thumbs down anymore on YouTube. So hard to see that data anymore. But the comments are just trashing this. The top one is, now I understand why the writer's strike was really about. So, that, I think that tells you everything you really need to know. But I mean, I don't know if that's interesting to me, right? Like, there's obviously a ton of people in the cultural zeitgeist that I would love to see in the modern era, but this just seems not good to me, and kind of crossing all sorts of lines. And I don't get the purpose here more than anything else. And so I don't know. The more of this is to come. I think that I agree with the commenter very much so that we want to be really careful about the writer strike issues, because the bottom line is that I don't think they're wrong. It's easy to mimic someone else's style, but that's different than getting it from the innovator themselves.
I don't think I did share this article last time, and there's a very, very famous psychologist. I'll try to find this article and do it next time. And one of his students, who he mentored in China, has created this apparently, and he's still living, very realistic chatbot using a large language model that can, answer questions and respond like him. And I think, to answer your question about the point, this George Carlin deal, I think, is probably just about trying to, figure out what the capabilities are. And then, I don't know if they can monetize that. But this potential, my students and I, for the last, I guess, at least 3 years, have watched episodes in this Age of AI YouTube special series that was narrated by Robert Downey Jr. And this week we've been watching episode 1, and it talks about Will.i.am of the Black Eyed Peas, wanting to create this avatar, but like where that is today, it's just very. It appears that we are at a point where fairly realistic avatars and chatbots and computer simulations of someone. If you can ingest, video, audio, content that they have produced, it will be able to create a very reasonable facsimile of them, and possibly with new content as well. Let me ask you a question. I ran into this on social media recently because I, am using ChatGPT now on my phone to create visualizations a lot. And there was an artist who had the position, and it's sort of like the daughter of George Carlin here, who's like, let's just not do this at all. Let's, let the artist's work stand. This person was saying, we just shouldn't use AI art at all. It's not ethical to even use it and to create it. Have you run into that? And do you have an opinion about that?
Yeah, in fact, I've heard that a lot. And I guess at what point do we draw that line is the first question I ask, right? Because, 40 years ago, you could put a floppy disk into a Commodore 64 and hook it up to a printer and print out a greeting card that was generated by a program. It's called Print Shop, that, put custom, put a real damper on greeting card business, right? When people can make their own. There's still no better banner maker than Original Print Shop on a dot matrix printer, right?
Yeah, printed a lot of those over the years.
Yeah, as did I. And in fact, I even for the first couple of years, I was in the classroom, even though they were very, very out of fashion. Then I had I had a dot matrix printer that I used to use all the time because it was funny. And it made a lot of loud noise, which I used for comedic effect. And so and it's funny because I've talked to some writers that don't like AI. They're less concerned about the art. I've talked to artists that are concerned about AI. They're less concerned about the writing. And I'm not saying that no line exists or that they're wrong. I just think that at what point do we draw that line, and hasn't the line already been crossed, right? In part because, could you argue that Photoshop, which has a lot of automated processes before AI ever became involved, is that crossing the line because it takes out the ability of a photographer, to do manual adjustments to an image or a photograph? I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that it's complicated.
Yeah, and I think that kind of an argument sort of falls into a Luddite style argument, which are framed, and that's not necessarily historically accurate, but it's framed today as just a pretty much blanket, anti-technology stance, and I don't think that's going to be a good way to move into the future, where these tools are just going to continue to grow in power and use and relevance. So
yep.
Let's see. Wow, we're doing pretty good on our coverage. Hey, how about CES? We said nothing about CES last time and it happened. Do you want to do that quick one that you got from Engadget?
Yeah, sure. What I've heard about it is that, there's a lot of AI plays there. So obviously that is not a surprise. And in fact, I think I remember talking with you in the early days of this podcast, even. I remember the year that e-readers were all the rage, and that everyone was selling a third-party e-reader. And of course, most of those died. And what remains is a very small part of that. But and of course, Dr. Fryer, I'm having problems finding our article on that issue.
Oh, I just put it into the chat. I don't know, but you probably can't click it from there. It's under hardware. It's AI hardware. It's the one hardware article.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So this one caught my eye because I think it's really interesting, and it's partly because I'm in the market right now for something. I have a 2014 Ford Ford crossover, and I like it. It's been a great car for me, and it's got a couple dents in it, and the gas mileage is pretty good. I would like to get to a point where it lasts long enough for me to get an electric car. So I don't know what that's going to look like. I will tell you that living in Montana, where the chargers are few and far between, it may not make sense as a vehicle in my state quite yet.
And that may be true of the nation too, because I think there's a big downturn right now in sales.
Yes.
So
yes, absolutely, right. So so that all said, what I would also note is that in thinking about a car, one of the reasons why I'm so interested maybe in updating is that I have a terrible in-car display system. It was pretty cool when it first came out. It was Ford's InSync system, but unfortunately, it hasn't been updated with the times, and it doesn't even talk to my iPhone anymore. So I can use it as a Bluetooth speaker still, but I can't use any of, it just doesn't work with an iPhone at all, a modern iPhone at all. I can't dial through it. I can't text through it like I could in previous generations of devices. So the reason why I mention that is because I've been looking at third-party systems I can mount to my dashboard that would give me either CarPlay from Apple or Android Auto, depending on what I plug into that. And I love CarPlay. I've been a huge CarPlay fan since the first time I used it in a rental car a couple years back. And so this article is about how Volkswagen is putting ChatGPT in cars for the purpose of enriching conversation. And this caught my eye because I've had some conversations with ChatGPT while driving. And about, I think it was 8, 9 weeks ago, early December, I was in another city in Montana giving doing the presentations, and I was having problems thinking through. Like I needed like a chat partner to talk through an issue that I wasn't able to figure out. I spent 20 minutes on the road chatting with ChatGPT via the Bluetooth connection in my car, and I got to a resolution on the issue, and then I had it restated back to me so I could log onto my desktop when I was done, or my full operating system to see what it looked like, and then I took that information. So pretty interesting stuff. It's a very low level to say that you're going to just plug in a large language model for chat purposes. But remember, the language model doesn't have to be that large to be very functional. And one of the examples I have of that is that I recently downloaded it's a Microsoft research large language model. It's called Poe. Or was it Pi? I think it's Poe. And I used, LM Studio, which is the desktop app for the purposes of, it's Pi. Microsoft Pi version 8.0-G, and it is only 9 gigs large, and I can have conversations with it that can do things like, what are the causes of World War I? And it's 9 gigs, which is, a smallish flash drive in 2024. And it's able offline to tell me an awful lot of correct information. And so having that locally on a car might be a fascinating way to add more functionality to in-car systems.
I am so sorry to throw you that curveball because I actually pulled that article, which we didn't talk about from last week. So I'm so sorry.
Quite all right.
Hey, let me ask you to talk about something that you do. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to have to Geek of the Week it here, but based on that CES article, I found one that I've added. It's the GE Profile Smart Indoor Pellet Smoker with active smoke filtration. And this was previewed at CES. Which this isn't to do with educational technology, but so maybe it should be a Geek of the Week. But it turns the smoke from your pellet smoker into warm air and filters, the bad stuff out. So I know that you haven't yet taken the plunge, Jason. I've found a local this is a complete aside, but there's a local restaurant fellow that I may be able to smoke some briskets for. So I don't think I'll be using this small GE indoor smoker if I do that.
No, but I really need to get on the lamb there.
Hey, but it's 28 degrees below though. An indoor, kitchen smoker doesn't sound too bad.
Yeah, no, it really does not. And I love good barbecue so much.
Yes. Yeah. Well, hey, the one I'm eyeing would let me smoke up to 15 briskets, and it's a portable one. So who knows? I don't know that I'll be trekking it up to Montana, but we can always dream. All right. Well, I think we've done it again, sir.
How about we Geek of the Week it?
Sounds good. Mine's easy. It's the virtual AI Playdate. It's this Saturday on January the 20th from 10 a.m. to noon Eastern time. So it's just going to be 2 hours. Due to some unforeseen circumstances, we were not able to have that face-to-face in the location that we had planned. And so it is going to be on Zoom. We've only got a handful. I think there's only like 6 people registered, which is fine. But the difference, because we debriefed the first play date we did on December 27th, is I've gone ahead and really just using videos and blog posts that Eric Kurtz has put together at the end of the year, which were phenomenal about different AI tools. I've created reference sheets because in many of the play dates that follow this model, those are the kinds of things that are used. Hey, let's go play with, Claude, or let's go play with whatever. And so the expectation is that we'll, depending on size, we may not use multiple breakout rooms. We may stay together, but that we'll pick some tools and actually play with them. And so I'm going to be sending an email to anyone who does register Friday. And I'm going to encourage everybody to use 2 screens. And this is what we did for the Summer Institute that worked really well with Zoom. You've got Zoom on one screen, and then you've got and if you can do this in the same Zoom call with 2 monitors, that's the best, because then you can share a screen and you're not having to try and juggle both things. You can have your video window over here and your content window over here and play with that. And anyway, we're going to see how that works in a virtual setting, but I'm excited about it because it's, like we've talked about, a catalyst for playing with the tools, and I need that. So if you're interested, you can actually Google AI Playdate CLT, because I put it on the Charlotte website that I set up. But the Eventbrite registration link is in our show notes, and you can also, I think it's the Google SEO now. So if you put in AI Playdate CLT, you can just have it pop up first.
Awesome. Well, I would like to share, and by the way, I'm gonna try to make it on Saturday. I can't guarantee it because that's early in the morning for me in my I like to sleep in on Saturdays. But we'll go from there. So I will share a tool. So my wife is flying tomorrow to Texas, and the weather is terrible here, and there have been flight cancellations across the United States. But one of the ways I keep track of flights is with Flight Aware, which is way more information than you'll ever need about the flights that you're taking. But what it does for you is that it will show you the location of the incoming plane that's coming to your airport to meet you, to take you away. So tonight we'll keep an eye on, I know which flight is coming in to Missoula from Salt Lake City. That flight is currently on its way to Reno, or I'm sorry, from Reno to Salt Lake City. And if the flight does get canceled, it's likely we will know more information before the airline actually contacts us. So flightaware.com, and I always have that up in a tab when I'm traveling on my phone. Okay, Dr. Fryer, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, I'm still at wesfryer.com/after, and enjoying a variety of different social media platforms, especially Mastodon and Facebook, but others as well. How about you?
Well, you can find me at aicentrist.com, and then I'm somewhere on Mastodon. At some point, I'll put that link up at aicentrist.com. But this isn't about me. This is about us. It's the EdTech Situation Room. We're a once-a-week podcast on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and sometime in the middle of the night UTC. Hey, we love it if you join us live. You can hang out with Betsy in the chat room, who is a frequent visitor of the live podcast. If you can't join us live, please download the video or watch the videos at YouTube, on Facebook. You can also download the podcast wherever finer podcasts are aggregated. And we hope to see you next time on the EdTech Situation Room. Good night.
Good night.